So it's summer in Washington. Thunderstorms roll across the city and they dump rain and then they go away. But sometimes those thunderstorms are stories. This week the story was Larry Summers versus Janet Yellen. Who should be the new Fed chairman?
Last week, this week, next week. It is like the rain.
Yeah.
So we're basically down to apparently two candidates: Janet Yellen, the Fed vice chair, and Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary and Harvard professor. And each of them, former Harvard president, each of them has pros and cons. Let's start with Janet Yellen.
Sure. I mean, Janet Yellen has got a lot of experience within the Fed system. She's been an economist for many years, well respected, but she kind of gets the way the Fed works. She was at the San Francisco Fed during the financial crisis. A lot of the people at the Fed know her. Unfortunately for her, that's kind of where her, where she's known is within the Fed.
Right.
Right. She doesn't have a constituency in the White House, which we've discovered in the last couple of weeks really matters in this case. On the substance, another knock on her is that she's too dovish. She represents the liberal wing of the Democratic Party. She'd be soft on inflation, soft on bubbles. I think another pro that weighs against that is, and we spent a lot of time looking at this, at her record. Regardless of what you say about her leanings about monetary policy, she's made some really good calls over the years. Going back to the 1990s, she warned Greenspan about froth building up in stock markets. She did it again on the housing bubble in the 2000s, and she's made good calls on inflation. So among economists, people think that she's a first-rate economist.
One of the questions, though, in a situation like this, I mean, it's one thing to just stack them up side by side and look at their credentials, but how big of a deal is the woman issue? She would be breaking a glass ceiling at the Fed. She's obviously got this incredible resume credentials, but how big of a that?
Well, it's only a question of whether it's a big deal to one person.
Right.
That's President Obama, and I don't know. Who knows? My guess is it's a factor. It's probably not a determining factor. I think a bigger factor is probably stature. I think if you go back to Paul Volcker, at least that's the way I look at it. Paul Volcker, Alan Greenspan, and then somewhat contrary to expectations, Ben Bernanke showed that you have to have some stature to do this job because it's a political job now as much as an economics job. It's a public relations job way more than it ever was, and I think that's one of the questions about Janet Yellen.
Well, but in fairness to Yellen, Bernanke didn't have a lot of stature when he took the job, and just the mere mention of the term stature, I think. So much of this comes back to this gender issue that as much as you might want to get away from it, it keeps coming back. When people talk about stature, there's an argument that that's actually demeaning to her.
Because she's short?
Because she's short, but
your point being that inherent in that comment is an assumption that a woman can't possibly have as much stature as a man.
Well, and also just to bring it back to Larry Summers, who's the other candidate here, and this is where the politics of this gets so complicated, especially among Democrats. Summers lost his job as the president of Harvard for demeaning comments he made about women. So this is a very complicated issue.